Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to join us this week. I would like to thank Bill Flick for stepping in for me in my absence, and I know Bill is a wealth of information, and I want to say thank you to Bill for stepping in while I was unable to be at the studio. My friends, I want to remind you of our how you can communicate with us. If there's anything you want us to research or review, it's what's going on 911@gmail.com, and we ask you to take advantage of that to communicate with us. We would love to hear some feedback with regards to your thoughts on our program, and as I said, if there's any subject matter you wish us to review or to research or to present to our viewing audience, we would very much appreciate your input. A lot going on in the world. The bankers have really stretched their greedy hands throughout the world. We've always just been discussing about the private for-profit bank we know is the Federal Reserve here in the United States and what they've done. But now, my friends, we find that the people of Cyprus are literally being raped and pillaged without any control of their supposed non-representing representatives. And I find it interesting that when they first came up, they were going to take the wealth of the people of Cyprus, that basically it was a 95-0 vote in disapproval that by what we know is the Congress of that nation, that they were not going to accept it. 2 days later, a little bit of bribery, a little bit of duress, a lot of threats, and a swing vote was taking place 95-0 in favor. And it reminded me of Representative Sherman back in 2008 when he came out and said that the bankers had literally told the financial subcommittee that basically if they did not approve the bailout, I call it the takeover, that, as he said, the sky would fall. My friends, we have to ask ourselves, and we're going to get into this in this program, who really is in charge here? Who really is controlling not only the purse strings, but the mechanism of this bludgeoning, ever-encroaching government? This insolvent corporation that you know is the government is exactly that. It is an insolvent corporation as debtors answering to the creditors. So before we get into that, circulating along the internet, there is a very heartfelt letter written by a former Marine. And I'm going to read this verbatim to you. This is what he writes. The American dream ended on November 6th in Ohio. The second term of Barack Obama, he basically, I don't have the time to read the whole thing verbatim to you, but basically what he's talking about, my friends, is that a coalition of blacks, Latinos, feminists, gays, government workers, union members, young people, the forever needy, the chronically unemployed, illegal aliens, and others, how they are not only bleeding our budgets, if you would. Of course, we know that's not the main impetus, the reason why we're in this debt, but how they are making a living by voting. The American Constitution has been replaced by Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Socialist George Soros will be pulling the strings on their beige puppet to bring us into accordingly. Our side ran two candidates who couldn't even win in their own home states. And he gets into a lot here with regards to the founding fathers sacrificing their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And basically that he's given up. And I won't read the whole thing verbatim to you, but I think you get the gist of it. This is a former Marine combat veteran from the Korean War era, and he's seen the changes in our nation. And I think that he feels the way a lot of Americans do currently, that they think that we can no longer have effect. And they're at a loss as of what to do. Well, I wanted to say to you that we are having effect. My friends, the only reason why World War III is not started, the only reason why they have not confiscated all the public pensions yet, which has been put in front of the Congress on 2 separate occasions, the only reason why the FEMA camps, or as John Ashcroft called them, the internment camps, are not open with you and I inside of them, and the only reason why they have not confiscated the wealth of all of our private savings accounts is because we are exposing them. Newsweek is no longer creating a printed magazine. All of them, CNN, even people like Piers Morgan. Believe it or not, my friends, Piers Morgan's viewing is only about 250,000 people nightly. And one of the best things that he did was to get the likes of Larry Pratt and Alex Jones and Jesse Ventura and others on his program with the gun issue to bring in higher ratings. They're desperate. They're desperate, my friends. So do not think that we are not having effect. We are. 320 sheriff's departments now, 324 have come forward and said they will not enforce gun confiscation. You have local people in Irisburg, Vermont here. You have multiple state senators and representatives throughout the nation saying, no, they will not enforce this. Wyoming. If a federal agent comes into Wyoming to disarm a lawful citizen, they will be arrested and detained. This is in writing. So please understand that we are having effect. And the reason why they haven't got to their end game is because of people getting off the couch, getting in their face, and letting them know that we know what they're up to, and we're not going to stand for it. Folks, they're going to go as far as you allow them to go. That's basically what it comes down to. They are going to push the envelope as far as you allow them to go. If you allow them to go into your bank accounts and take your sweat equity, they're going to do it. If you allow them to confiscate your guns, they're going to do it. If you allow them at any aspect of what they're after, they are going to do it unless you protect yourself, you protect your family, and you protect the future of our nation by saying no. And that is why this letter was so disheartening to me. I am a former Marine myself, and I will tell you, there is one thing about Marines, semper fidelis. We are always faithful. I can understand this fella's discouragement. I can understand his desire of wanting to quit and thinking we are not having effect. Well, I hate to say this to my fellow former Marine, but he's wrong. We are having effect. And we're growing every day. We're growing in the media. We're growing on the internet. Folks, that's why they're after these so-called cyber wars. That's what they're after. They have to control the information. There is an info war going on, and they're losing that battle. You remember we had that quote from Hillary Clinton about 6 months ago, speaking at the Council on Foreign Relations? And she said, there is an information war going on, and we are losing that battle. That we is not you and I, my friends. That we is them. That we is them, and they are losing the battle, and they know it. So we are going to continue the fight. We're going to continue to educate, and we are going to continue to pray. We're going to continue to pray, because if you do not have faith, if you do not have a foundation, they will lead you down any road they desire. I found this to be an interesting quote. This was from 1887, Alexander Tyler. And if you don't know who Alexander Tyler was, he was a Scottish professor who turned historian towards the end of his life. But he taught for decades at the University of Edinburgh. And he had this to say about democracy. A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time the voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse over loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. My friends, I want you to think where we are in this country right now. 51% of the people in this country are on the government dole. Now, some of that is earned. People on Social Security, they're being robbed, they're being fleeced, they're not getting the promise of amount that they said they were going to get, and what they are getting is a devalued purchasing power, a devalued medium of exchange. They paid for the Social Security, they paid for the Medicare. But when you start talking about the food stamps, and friends, understand something, that food stamps, and there's millions and millions of dollars weekly that go out, also help devalue what you're working for, which you think is a dollar, which is not a dollar. And if you've been watching this program, you know very well what I'm talking about. It's a Federal Reserve note. Federal Reserve, private foreign bank, no acknowledgement of debt. My friends, that's why there's two signatures on that entity. One's the creditor, one's the debtor. You are the surety for it. Your sweat equity is the surety for it. As Joseph Stamp said, former president of a Bank of England, the greatest sleight of hand ever developed by man. And this is the crutch of our problem. But what Mr. Tyler is speaking of is that if I work every day and I have to pay the taxes and the fees to supplement those that are not working, who could be with effort, it gets to the point that you start to look in the mirror and say, why? Why bother? And now with this new immigration reform, and anytime you hear the word reform coming from the government, my friends, you should be looking over your shoulder. And that's another thing that has discouraged this former Marine. He's worked all his life. He's gone to war for this nation. And he sees what is going on. He's a student enough of history to understand our predicament. He knows this whole thing could collapse any day. Any day. Did you hear a word about what was going on? And then all of a sudden, the next day, they're in Cyprus, they're in the people's banks accounts, taking billions and billions of dollars. Now, there's another process to why they chose Cyprus. One, it's small scale, it's a test. But two, Mr. Putin out of Russia has not been playing ball with the international bankers. And a lot of Russian businesses, a tremendous amount of them, have hundreds of billions of dollars in the Cyprus bank accounts. Think of it. Mr. Putin doesn't play ball. They find the biggest place that they can loot the value from Russia without stepping into Russia itself. And it's a nice, tall, small test scale, a litmus test, if you would, for the international bankers to see what the end result, what the reaction is going to be from the people of Cyprus. And they sell it to save their country. My friends, I wish you would study what's going on in Iceland, because the people of Iceland had a vote whether we should pay this fraudulent debt. 92% said no. And Iceland is doing very well for itself. They are actually exporting 2.8 times more than what they import. First time in the history of the country. Their unemployment rate, their real unemployment rate, not the U6 and the U3 like they sell at the dog and pony show here in the United States, is literally 4.3%. Our actual unemployment rate, depending who you're reading, is between 19 and 21%. Their biggest problem with Iceland right now is they're still part of the European Union, but I have my suspicion, friends, that'll be changing. That may be changing. The people, I am in contact with 6 people from Iceland. One of them is a real estate agent, one of them is a carpenter, one of them is a chef, and I will tell you, they have done very well in educating themselves who the international bankers are, their games, their tricks, and the mechanics of their warfare. And believe me, this is a war being waged against us. So Iceland has done very well since they not only threw the bankers out, they have now indicted 17 of them. They indicted 8 more last week. And you know, I got on the internet and I was watching a speech from the president of Iceland. And this is what he said. The government of Iceland bailed out the people and convicted and indicted the bankers. Banksters is the word he used, the banksters. Unlike America and the rest of Europe. Now, you have to ask yourself, why? Why has that happened? And Mr. Tyler also goes on with a sequence of events here, and I want to ask yourself, where do you think we are right now in this country? And as he goes on here, the average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history has been about 200 years. During those 200 years, these nations have progressed through the following sequence. From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence. Do you think that's where we are right now? We've been so apathetic. Now, 51% of our population is on dependence. And then from dependence back into bondage. That's where we are about to go, my friends. So let's talk about some of the headlines that you might not have seen on the mainstream media. I know on this program we have been talking about New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez, who is under fire right now for prostitution scandals, plural. Anyway, I was doing some research on this, and we discovered that the people of the United States have been paying for Senator Robert Menendez's flights going down to the Dominican Republic to have his affairs with these prostitutes to the tune of $58,500 a whack. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. America. You have been paying for Senator Menendez of New Jersey, the 7th rank senator, Democratic senator, to go down in the Dominican Republic and have wonderful times with prostitutes, to the tune of $58,500 per flight. But don't feel bad. Did you see what happened with Vice President Biden on the news this morning? That when they went to Israel, they spent $371 for 2.5 days of limousine service. Not security, not the whole thing, limousine services. But don't fret, because Mr. Obama is at it again. He's going to take care of it for you. This is a source from the United States government itself, whitehouse.gov. Preparations underway for Obama vacation on Martha's Vineyard. Imagine that. And they get into how he's going to be playing golf at Farm Neck Golf Club. By the way, there's no word if Tiger Woods is going to join him. How much is that going to cost you, my friends? $110 million. $110 million. So President Obama, the CEO of the insolvent corporation that you call the United States government, can go to Martha's Vineyard and play golf. Oh, it gets frustrating. I can understand why my fellow Marine is so discouraged. There is some good news. Surabhu Firearms refuses to sell .50 caliber sniper rifles to New York Police Department. Subaru Firearms, a manufacturer of bolt-action and semi-automatic 50 caliber sniper rifles, has canceled their contract to sell their wares to the NYPD. The reason is of the unfair gun laws, and they do not support law enforcement in New York any longer. Now, I did some research on this, and I will tell you right now that there are over 150 companies, and here's my notes, that have officially refused to sell to law enforcement in the state of New York following the passage of the SAFE Act. Of course, this is always to make you safe, always for your benefit. And I just think that is outstanding that over 150 companies have told the state of New York and the New York Police Department, any entity in the New York State, that we will not sell our wares to you. We're going to sell it to the people first. I just think that's fantastic. Okay, let us continue here. I have been studying, as I told you guys, I was going to get into what's going on with the Obamacare, and basically that the Obamacare are the 115 million, 31,000 households in the United States. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Obamacare, the raise of cost that is going to go on, and I have to count my digits here, $16,692,238,790.20. Well, guess what that comes out to every household in the United States, my friends? $21,817 per household. Now, I want you to understand, these are estimates. This is only an estimate. You know what happens with government estimates. They always come in low ball, and it's always 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 100 times more than what they claim. So think of that. Aren't you so glad that they're going to pass the Obamacare? So it's reduced health care. You're going to lose the relationship between you and your doctor to make the decisions for yourself. Some of the care is not going to be provided to you, and I'll explain that in a minute, and it's going to be at a cost of almost $22,000, according to their estimates, $22,000 more a year, or if you want to get down to their estimates, $21,817 per household. Does that make you feel all warm and fuzzy? Now, you may be saying to yourself, Tom, what do you mean I'm going to lose the relationship between me and my doctor? And what do you mean I may not have the care available to me? My friends, I told you I've been studying this 11,000-page document. And here's how it's going to work. They now admit that there are death panels in it. And I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that you're an elderly gentleman, and let's say that you have some detrimental health history. And I'm just going to throw out that you have a cardiac history or renal history or the big one, cancer. And of course, the cancer rates are growing expeditiously. Well, of course it is. They're poisoning our food, the vaccinations, the chemtrails, the fluoride in the water, the SV40 in the vaccinations, the formaldehyde in the vaccinations, the thromboxylide, the mercury in the vaccinations. Of course they are. Of course cancer rates are skyrocketing. You know what the elite call cancer? Number one, it's the cancer program. And number two, they call it soft killing. Look it up. All these people are eugenists, my friends. Georgia Guidestones. They want to reduce the population to 500 million people. There is just under 7 billion people in the world right now. So if you go to your doctor and you have this history, say cardiac history, and let's say that you need another stent put in, or you fractured a hip, or whichever. Well, my friends, these panels are going to review your medical history. And it's all a point scale. See? It's a point scale. And the more history, the more cardiac or whatever history you have, detrimental history, and the more cost to the operation or invasive procedure that has to be done to you, the lower the point scale. And if you do not meet this certain point scale criteria, it will not be available to you. Look it up. Read it yourself. This is your loving Obamacare program. By the way, my friends, you already started paying some taxes on this on January 1st, 2013. This is where we are, my friends. And so you're going to lose the relationship, the privacy with your doctor. You're going to have other people making medical decisions for you at a cost, at an increased cost of $21,817. Okay, now let's get into our main topic for today. The people who are destroying the world, bleeding our nation. And I would call that the international bankers. And the following letter I have, actually public statement from one of the international bankers, I think will hit home to everybody as to what is going on and where we are. Jamie Dimon, and that's D-I-M-O-N, often cited as the most responsible head of a Wall Street investment bank, resigned last week as chairman and CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. In a blistering letter published this morning in Britain's Financial News, friends, this is mainstream media. This isn't my wacko news outlets. This is mainstream media. Dimon said he is tired of working with the bankrupt moral culture of finance and called for a criminal investigation into wrongdoing at J.P. Morgan and other major investment banks. For too long, I have been a witness to what I consider to be unethical and illegal behavior at the highest levels of Wall Street. I thought that I could change the system from the inside, but over the past few years, I have been proven wrong. Despite the concerted effort of myself and my closest staff, the recent losses at our chief investment office and the global LIBOR scandal itself shows that firms such as J.P. Morgan and many others have simply become too big to manage. I want you to remember them words, too big to manage, because we're going to get into another statement made by the Attorney General about these entities being too big. For that reason, I am resigning from my post as Chairman and Chief Executive Order of J.P. Morgan Chase, effective immediately at noon today. And I urge global regulators to introduce new rules seeking to limit the size of scope of the largest international financial institutions. Long recognized as a less corrupt institution than the competing banks such as Goldman Sachs and Barclays and others. My friends, that statement comes from Britain's Financial News. That's like the Wall Street Journal of Britain. Okay? So what they're telling you is they're all corrupt, but J.P. Morgan has been on a lighter level of corruption. This is in the mainstream media in Britain. J.P. Morgan has come under fire in recent months for a number of trading scandals. Most notably, the bank has lost over $6 billion on bad derivatives bets in the notorious London whale fiasco. But in his resignation letter, Dimon did not limit his reasoning to recent events, explaining that he is disgusted by the behavior of investment banks during the financial crisis. Now, this is Mr. Dimon speaking. Over 4 years have passed since the greatest financial collapse in the history of this nation, and still no one on Wall Street has been held accountable for the crimes which have been committed. Washington says they can't find one single banker guilty of fraud. I can think of 15 people off the top of my head who should be behind bars. Why aren't more people in jail? If you rob a bank, you go to jail. If a bank robs you, it's called a bailout. We need to end this cycle of impunity on Wall Street, and I am prepared to testify against my fellow bankers if need be. I don't know why I have held my nose for so long. Honestly, it was probably the money. But I started doing yoga last month and have been thinking about researching Buddhism. I am ready to turn over a new leaf in my life and find something else besides money upon which to base my self-worth and my value as a human being. Diamond says he is not surprised by the lack of inaction in Washington, given the symbolic nexus of corruption between the political actors and big banks. Let me read that again. Diamond says he is not surprised by the lack of inaction in Washington, given the symbolic nexus of corruption between the political actors and big banks. Let me explain how this system works, Diamond writes. Politicians protect us from competition and criminal prosecution, and in return, we give them money to use in their campaigns. There is only one word to describe such an arrangement. It is bribery. And you know what really is insane? It is not even illegal. And he's correct. It's not illegal. Those idiots in Washington actually write laws regulating the manner in which they would like to be bribed. Only $2,000 per person unless it is funneled into a super PAC or into a primary fund versus a general election fund. I mean, who cares how much money goes into which account? It's all just corruption, plain and simple. And sadly, I admit, I have been a part of it. This is from the CEO, retired former CEO of J.P. Morgan. But I want you to pick up on some of his language, my friends. First of all, he can no longer look in the mirror and be happy with what he sees. Second of all, the man has courage. He is willing to not only make a public statement like this, but he is prepared to testify against his fellow bankers. And I will tell you what will happen to Mr. Diamond. He will drown in a canoeing accident. He will have a suicide with 5 bullets in his head. He will have a heart attack. There will be something wrong that's very detrimental to the health of Mr. Diamond. The other thing is, I want you to listen to his language here. Diamond says he is not surprised by the lack of inaction in Washington, given the symbiotic nexus of corruption between the political actors and big banks. Folks, you got to read between the lines here. Actors. Who is in control of a show or a play? Is it the actors? No. They are mainly the stage presence or the television presence for you to see. Who is in control of that stage play or that television show? The directors. So we have to ask ourselves, if the dog and pony that we are allowed to see, are these people really in charge? No. They're merely actors. It's the directors we have to look at. So then you ask yourself, well, who are the directors? Who controls the money? Amschel Rothschild, what was his famous statement? Give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws. Who is in control of our, I won't say money, our medium of exchange, because we do not have money. Right? Remember, many a show years ago, we read to you verbatim Black's Law Dictionary. Money does not encompass debt or notes. What is a note? An acknowledgement of debt. What do you have in your pocket, my friends? You have a Federal Reserve note. You cannot go to the bank anymore and get your ounce of gold or ounce of silver with a certificate. A certificate is a negotiable instrument. It holds value. So Mr. Diamond is saying to you in plain language, one, Mr. Obama and the rest of the unrepresentative representatives are not in charge. The banks are in charge. And I compliment this man for having the courage to say the words he said, and I hope he does go forward with the actions that he claims. Now, I asked you to remember the one word, well, a lot of words that he said, and it was about how big these institutions are. Okay? And I asked you to remember what his words were about the size, the scope, and the power of these institutions. Well, the Attorney General of the United States, Mr. Eric Holder, and this is an article from The Hill, and if you don't know what The Hill is, it's an article, it's a news service that does nothing but follow the events on the Hill. And on the Hill, I'm talking about Washington, D.C., the House of Representatives, the Congress particularly. When the Attorney General of the United States admits that banks are simply too big to prosecute, it might be time to admit that we have a problem. You think so? And that goes for both the financial and just us system. Not justice, just us. Eric Holder made this rather startling confession. It wouldn't be startling to anyone who's been following what's going on, in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. And for those of you in Vermont, Senator Leahy is a senior member of that committee. The Hill reports. It could be a key moment in debate over whether to do something about the size and complexity of our banks, which have gotten bigger and more systematically important since the financial crisis. Well, I guess they have. They have our troops overseas killing. You know, it's funny, it's amazing to me how they can swing the minds of the poor in one nation to go and kill the poor of another nation for resources. It really boggles my mind. There was no weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And if you really think that a guy who, Osama bin Forgotten, who died in 2002, yes, I said he died in 2002. He died from renal failure. Osama bin Forgotten, folks, needed dialysis every 3 to 4 days. Do you think they were providing dialysis to him in a cave in Bora Bora, Afghanistan with no electricity? I don't think so. Do you think he was able to coordinate the events of 9/11 from a cave in Bora Bora, Afghanistan? Heck, we all saw that grainy film of him, supposedly celebrating the whole thing. How could they do that? They couldn't even have a camera with proper equipment to make a film for him. Of course, the CIA did it, which has now been admitted, and it was meant to be grainy, so you really couldn't make out the double or the actor that they had for Osama bin Laden. Let's continue with Mr. Holder. This is Mr. Holder speaking. I am concerned that the size of some of these institutions have become so large that it does become difficult to impossible for us to prosecute them when we are hit with the indications that if you do prosecute, if you do bring criminal charges, it will have a negative impact on the national economy, perhaps even the world economy itself. Holder continued, and I think it is a function of the fact that some of these institutions have become too large. This is the Attorney General of the United States. Now, I will back up and qualify something. And we read this verbatim to you again on this program some time ago. The Attorney General of the United States and the Secretary of the Treasury are not paid by you and I. They are paid by the international bankers through the International Monetary Fund. Folks, we read this to you verbatim. Look it up yourself. Just punch it on your computer. Secretary of Treasury not paid by United States government. It'll come up. So they may be selling this because they always have to sell it to the people that, we haven't prosecuted them because they're too big to prosecute. My friends, he's answering to them, and so isn't Obama, and so isn't the rest of them the entire time, just as Mr. Diamond said. Now, you got to understand when all these banks have been prosecuted, let me back up. Some of them have been prosecuted for the drug laundering. We talked about Wachovia, right? Remember, it was their penalty was 0.001%. That's 1/100th of 1% of what they took in from laundering the drugs, particularly the heroin and cocaine. Okay, this is from the Bloomberg News Service. Again, mainstream media, not my wacko news services. Only Wall Street wins in Detroit crisis, reaping $474 million in fees. How's that, my friends? If you want to be disgusted and you want to see the future of the United States, get on the internet and punch in Detroit. Folks, I am in the EMS and fire service, and I will tell you I have read verbatim on the internet the standing orders given to the Detroit Fire Department that in certain neighborhoods, if houses/buildings are on fire, to let them burn. There's no qualification if there's people in here, if there's animals in here, or anything. It's strictly neighborhood, burn. Do not use your apparatus. Do not risk your life. Do not do any of the things that firefighters do every day for their communities. Let it burn. And when you read between the lines, it's so hopefully they can get some HUD money. Let me read this article to you. The winners, now this is Bloomberg. This is one of the biggest anti-gunners in the United States. The only winners in the financial crisis that brought Detroit to the brink of a state takeover are Wall Street bankers who reaped more than $474 million from a city too poor to keep its streetlights on. The city started borrowing to plug their budget holes in 2005 under former mayor Kawam Kilpatrick. Oh, by the way, let me just continue with this and I'll get into Mr. Kilpatrick, who was convicted on corruption charges. That year, it issued $1.4 billion in securities to fund pension payments. Last year, it added $129 million into its debt. 9.3% of its general fund budget in part to repay the loans taken to service other bonds. My friends, it's what I always say. It is perpetual debt. Detroit, which is trying to avoid becoming the largest U.S. municipal bankruptcy, struggles to serve residents after revenue decline and when the auto industry collapsed and the city began to empty. My friends, the auto industry did not collapse. What happened was you and I paid for it to remanufacture and to regroup in other countries. That's what happened. The auto industry is doing just fine. Their profits are up. They're doing very well in China. They're doing very well in South America. They're doing very well in Vietnam. Good thing we bombed them people for 16 years, huh? They're doing extremely well. It did not collapse. It was transferred out of the nation on the backs, on the surety, and the sweat equity of you and I. The auto industry, my friends, is doing just fine. Michigan Republican Governor Rick Snyder is preparing to name an emergency manager who will have to address the debt and derivatives taken on in the last 8 years. Folks, who do you think all that burden's going to get shifted to? If history is any barometer, I can tell you who it's going to get shifted to. It's going to get shifted to you and I. Even though we have nothing to do with Michigan. The bankers are going to make sure of it. And the actors, as Mr. Diamond called them, are going to sign off on it. We have no lights. We have no public buses. Poor streets, and now we're paying millions of dollars a year on our debt, said David Soul, a retired municipal worker and advocate for Moratorium Now Coalition. a Detroit group that fights foreclosures and evictions. The banks say they need to be paid first, but there is no money. The city, which peaked at 1.85 million residents in 1950, has lost more of a quarter than its population since the year 2000. The 700,000 inhabitants who remain endure unreliable buses, inadequate police and fire protection, and darkened streets. You want to know why the streets are dark, my friend? You can paraphrase the crime, and you can paraphrase the fact that the city of Detroit cannot even turn the streetlights on. And who benefited from all this, my friends? To the tune of $474 million just last year? International bankers. And by the way, Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, he's an interesting fellow, and he plays right along with the rest of them. And I'm really surprised that they actually got a conviction on this man, because usually I think the bankers threw him to the wolves, but usually they take care of their own and protect, as Mr. Diamond said, protect the criminals. If you're a white shirt criminal, not a blue collar criminal. Okay, going along with our topic about the banks, I wanted to read a public statement from you by Arizona State Senator Karen Johnson, and this is rather long, and I'm running out of time, so I am going to try to read this verbatim to you, okay? And we'll go from there, so please bear with me. The name of the article is Profits Over Patriotism. Every night, drug smugglers gather around at the border between Arizona and Mexico, waiting for nightfall so they can sneak into the U.S. with their loads of methamphetamines and cocaine. This is the doorway to heaven for the drug lords. Arizona is the drug highway by which 60% of illegal drugs enter the U.S., eventually earning billions in profits for the drug cartels and banks. Now comes the news that the cartels and terrorists have not only penetrated the border, but have also infiltrated our banking system and spread their corruption into the financial system. My friends, I think it's the other way around. The bankers have always controlled the drug lords. They use the government to do it. And the system is controlled and has been controlled by the banks from day one. A few months ago, Jerome Corsi broke the story that the U.S. office of a London-based international bank, HCBS, and by the way, my friends, if you want to read a fascinating book on this, it's called by a gentleman by the name of John Cruz, and the name of the book is World Banking, World Corruption, Using Your Identity. Very, very good. Highly recommend it. Was being investigated for money laundering for international drug cartels and terrorists. HCBS, one of the largest banks in the world, has about 7,500 offices in more than 80 countries. Okay? And terrorists in Europe, North and South America, Asia, Pacific region, Middle East, and Africa. Their headquarters is in New York. Of course it is. On July 17th, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations issued its findings on HCBS. Among other things, the bank was accused of facilitating transactions that hindered the U.S. efforts to stop terrorists, drug traffickers, road jurisdictions, and others from using the U.S. financial system. So what? These bankers are so stupid they don't know they're laundering billions of dollars of drug money every year? Is that what they want you to believe? U.S. financial system and providing U.S. correspondence services to banks with links to terrorism. Here's how it works. The drug cartels and terrorists funnel their dirty money through the foreign banks with lax standards. And who creates the standards, my friends, for the banks? The government. Who controls the government? The banks. The drug cartels and terrorists funnel their dirty money through foreign banks with lax standards. Then those banks transfer the funds into U.S. banks through shell companies and other phony bank accounts. Camouflaged in multiple layers of false transactions, the dirty money is difficult to trace back to the crimes from which it came. After moving through several disguised accounts, the dirty cash looks clean. HCBS operation in the United States is called HCBS, Bank of the U.S. It is one of the largest U.S. processors of transactions for foreign financial institutions. Over a period of several years, bank regulators and Department of Treasury repeatedly cited HBUS for money laundering violations. HBUS executives responded by dutifully drawing up new policies to correct the violations. Then the bank simply ignored the new policies and continued to operate in violation of the law. So, my friends, the Treasury Department tells them basically, hey, we've caught you doing this, so we're going to leave it up to you to change your own policies to correct this. Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense to you? If you get caught doing something wrong, the people who caught you doing it, are they going to say, well, we're going to leave this up to you to correct this? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But the Treasury Department, in their infinite wisdom, and with a gun held to their head, said, we're going to let you clean up your own act. What they're basically saying to them is, hey, make sure you got this procedure down so you don't get caught again. That's basically what they're saying here. The bank simply ignored the new policies and continued to operate in violation of the law. When the next audit was performed, the regulators discovered the continuing violations and issued new citations. The bank responded with new written policies and then continued with business as usual, ignoring its own policies. The game was played out dozens of times with citations, new policies, and ongoing monitoring laundering activities that were never corrected. The outlawed bank seemed immune to law enforcement. Now pause for a moment and go back to the time of August 15th, 1914. That's the date of the opening of the Panama Canal. My friends, I tell you, I've been doing some studying on this, and I think this woman sums it up rather well. One of the great wonders of the modern world and a tribute to American ingenuity and perseverance. A massive series of interconnected locks and dams which allowed ships to be raised 85 feet above sea level over the Isthmus of Panama and then lowered again to the sea on the other side by raising and lowering water levels in various locks. Until 1914, all previous attempts to build a canal across the isthmus had failed. Between 1881 and 89, 20,000 employees of the French Canal Company died from malaria, yellow fever, and other tropical diseases. After 8 difficult years, the companies went bankrupt, gave up, conquered by disease, thick jungles, and landslides. When the U.S. succeeded in building the 51-mile canal across the isthmus, ships were able to cross from the Atlantic to the Pacific for the first time in history without having to sail all the way around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. The Panama Canal is a great commercial value to the United States and many other nations. Cutting down transit times means lowering the cost of moving goods and products, but the most significant aspect of the canal is its military value. The United States is partially surrounded by vast oceans, making us particularly vulnerable to attack by sea. Thus, our Navy is a critical component of our national defense. And if the Navy is important, then the Panama Canal is the crown jewel of the U.S. Navy. I should say was. The United States has 2 open coastlines, thousands of miles apart, facing 2 different oceans on the eastern and western edges of the country. Ideally, we would like to have 2 navies, one to protect the eastern or the Atlantic seaboard and the other to protect the western Pacific seaboard. Maintaining the 2 navies will be very costly, however. In the absence of 2 full navies, the next thing was able to move ships quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Until 1914, however, they were blocked from doing that on the land masses of Central and South America. My friends, I'm going to get into it in this article, this statement made by Senator Johnson, exactly why we gave away the Panama Canal. And I am sorry to say I am out of time to continue this, and I don't want to skip over some pertinent facts. So I guess you're going to have to come back next week to get the full understanding of why we gave the Panama Canal away. Now, I want you to understand who was in charge of the Panama Canal. Who owns the port? Balboa. The 2 ports on the eastern and western ends of that? China. Or Costco, Chinese Overseas Shipping Company. Who owns the canal itself? Panama, but nobody can enter or exit the port without going under Chinese control, including the United States Navy. And when you find out why we did this, how was it sold to you and I? Do you remember Jimmy Carter? well, Panama under Mr. Toros took the Shah of Iran. We needed a place to put him, and no other country would accept him. So the Shah of Iran in November of 1978, when the Iranian embassy fell, because the Iranian people were tired of us butchering their country and what we were doing there, said, well, if you take the Shah for 30 days, we'll give you the canal. That sound like a fair trade to you? No, but that's how they sold it to the gullible American people. And I'm sorry to say, you're going to have to come back next week to get the full story and the underlying reasoning why we made this foolish act. And I want you to think about this for the week, my friends. One, do you think the bankers were involved here? And two, do you think the bankers profited here? My friends, as always, we are very, very thankful you take the time from your busy day to join us. I hope that while you're watching this program, you understand one thing. As I say to all my friends and anyone I talk to, education is our best ammo. And this poor fellow Marine that we opened up with being so despondent by what's going on in our nation has got to look in the mirror and understand the creed of the United States Marine Corps, and that is Semper Fidelis. We are always faithful, and we are faithful in order to God, country, and Corps. And it is important that all of us as Americans absorb that understanding, absorb that energy, and understand that this war, and there is a war being waged against us, is ongoing. It's not behind the scenes anymore. It is in our face. And what's going on in Cyprus, my friends, is going to happen in the United States. They are going to take the public pensions. Like I said, it has been in front of the Congress twice now and gladly, hopefully, continually voted down. But the people of Greece, Italy, Ireland, Spain, and Portugal, I don't believe are going to be that fortunate. And when they create the other crisis, and they will, another Sandy Hook or whatever, and they disarm the American people, there will be nothing left to keep the international banksters at bay. As I reported to you about a month ago, there are 225,000 accountable foreign troops in this country right now under a foreign command. Not to mention all the mercenaries, you politically know them as contractors, that are working for private corporations. Now it's called XE. My friends, we are in very interesting times, and you have got to be diligent. You've got to understand that we are winning the information war, and you've got to understand that everything that has taken place in our country makes perfect sense once you do understand that there is a war being waged against us, who is waging that war, what are the logistics and the mechanics of that war, and the reasoning behind it. As always, we are extremely thankful that you take the time from your day to join us. And please join us next week when you will discover the true, real reason why we gave away the Panama Canal. As always, my friends, in closing, we remind you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines.